Good evening. At this time, we'd like to convene the Palo Alto City Council Finance Committee meeting for Tuesday, March 7th, 2023. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames. Here. Councilmember Stone.
Here.
3 present. Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight we have on the agenda 4 different action items. After we will soon have a public comment on non-agendized items, but just to be clear on what we have ahead of us. 2024 water utility financial plan, the 2024 wastewater collection utility financial plan, the storm and surface water drainage plan, and the electric utility construction services contract with VIP Powerline. So our first item is actually for public comment, where the public is welcome to speak on any items under the purview of this committee that are not otherwise on the agenda. And do we have any speakers who wish to speak on public comment?
Chair, we do have one request. One moment, please.
Okay.
John Kelly, if you're there, you can speak.
Thank you very much, Chair Burt, committee members. I would like to ask the committee and city staff, and I want to return to something that I said to the city council, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. In early February, the Daily Post reported about the knowledge of a $40 million surplus that, in my estimation, was not communicated clearly to the public prior to the vote on Measure K last fall. And there was also a colloquy between Councilmember Tanaka, the city manager, and other members of city staff about this issue, either at that or at a subsequent meeting. And I would simply like to ask the question again, whether the city manager, other members of city staff, the finance committee, or the city council has done anything to investigate this matter and to report back to the community in a public and meaningful way what was known, when was it known, to whom was it known, and what the current status of that surplus is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And without being able to address matters that are not on the agenda, I would encourage Mr. Kelly and other members of the public that actually much of that is already answered in the public record from meetings council meetings preceding November 6th. And on that note, our first action item is a resolution approving the fiscal year 2024 water utility financial plan and other related matters. And who from staff would like to kick off the presentation?
So good evening, Chair Burt, council members, Dean Batchelor, Utility Director. So as you mentioned, we're coming to you with 4 items tonight, 3 of them from the utility side and 1 from the Public Works. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jonathan Abendschein, who is our Assistant Director for our Resource Planning Group, which will start off the presentation and then turn it over to Lisa Malaire, our Senior Resource Planner, to actually get into the details of the first 2 items. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Dean. Can everybody hear me okay? So I'm Jonathan Abendschein, Assistant Director, and good evening, council members. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of all of what's happening with all 4 of our utilities this year, just as a preview and to provide context for your discussions on water, wastewater, and storm drain tonight. But obviously, we will be here at Electric and Gas on March 21st, and so the discussion for those utilities will happen on March 21st. We want to give this overview because there are various trends that are contributing to increases or decreases across multiple utilities that you'll see discussed over and over in different places tonight and then on March 21st. And the story is complicated this year because there's some trends that are increasing rates and there are others that are decreasing them. And so that leads to situations where we might be proposing a rate change in some utilities, but we also just want to be clear with people about what they can expect on their utility bills over the next year, because there may actually be some decreases in their overall bill. Before I jump into the rates proposals, I just want to talk about the trend that's most on people's minds right now, and that's the skyrocketing energy prices that occurred this winter. Those high energy prices were unprecedented. They were the highest on record. It cost Palo Alto 5 times as much to buy gas this January as compared to last January. And that's showing up on people's February bills. Some of the contributing factors here were high demand due to cold weather, low amounts of gas in storage, and constraints on supply across the West. There are several investigations going on because these prices still, despite these factors, were significantly higher than we would have expected. So I believe there's a FERC investigation going on, as well as the California ISO and the CPUC. So we're following those. And we are also looking at what options we can bring back to council to protect against the potential price spikes like this in the future. Next slide, please. So fortunately, starting in February, gas and electric market prices have started to decline from the extreme levels of the winter, as have our utility costs, and that's going to start showing up in people's gas bills in March. But as of this hearing, most people, some people have started to receive those March bills and have seen that gas bills have started to come lower. But a lot of those watching right now may really be worrying what's happening with their gas bills over the next few months. And so these are a few important messages we wanted to share. First off, we expect March gas bills to be less than half of February gas bills. And of course, that's still significantly higher than last year's bills, but we do expect April gas bills to be even lower. I believe it's another 40% lower than March, based on the prices as of March 1st, which set our utility costs for the month. And the council is discussing rebates to customers to provide some relief from high winter gas prices this year. And I know those discussions are upcoming. And in the meantime, we put on the slide some of the avenues that customers have to seek relief from high winter energy bills. The city's arranging payment plans for anybody who wants to pay off those bills over 6 to 8 months. We're also offering free consultations with the city's home efficiency advisor, and we have our rate assistance program and free energy efficiency improvement program to help lower income customers. Some of these programs help retroactively. Some are, they really just help reduce the burden going forward. Next slide, please. These really high winter gas prices and then the declines that are happening over the next few months are one of several trends that are going to affect people's utility bills in calendar year 2023. They are one of the most impactful. We're going to, as these prices start to decline, these energy prices start to decline, we're going to start passing the supply cost declines through to our monthly, through to the customers, through our monthly gas commodity rate adjuster, and also through expected decreases in the electric utilities hydroelectric rate adjuster, which we would expect in July. We'll talk about that on March 21st. You will see, though, that there are still a lot of upward pressures on rates, and we are proposing some rate increases in July. But even with the electric and gas rate increases we're proposing this year, we are expecting that people's electric and gas bills will be lower in FY 2024 than they were in FY 2023. And we want to drive this point home because the energy price spikes this year have made it complicated to describe what's happening to people's utility bills over the next few months. overall, the story we want to get across is that utility bills are declining from the very high winter levels. They're going to go down over the next few months. There will be some increase in July, but not to the levels seen in winter 2022, in winter of this year. These projections are uncertain. I mean, I want to acknowledge that. However, we have a graph we can show at our next meeting. These increases in January really were extreme compared to anything we've seen historically. So with that said, I just want to talk about a few more of the factors driving the proposed July increases. So first off, energy prices are expected to remain elevated going forward. Even though they're not going to be at these winter, the levels we saw this winter, they're also not going to be as low as pre-pandemic levels, according to what we're seeing in the market right now. Both gas and electric transmission costs are rising, as are environmental charges, and those factors will continue to push bills up in coming years. The utilities are also recovering from the pandemic. So during the pandemic, we kept rate increases low for multiple years to help customers suffering from the economic impacts of shelter in place. So in all utilities, revenues are currently below costs. Now, we knew this was going to happen when we kept the rate increases low, and we looked ahead, and we had planned to phase in the rate increases gradually after the pandemic, using reserves to absorb deficits for a few years. But in most utilities at this point, that's no longer possible. So for electric and gas, the winter energy cost spikes were not passed through completely to customers, and the difference was absorbed from reserves, and both of those utilities are well below minimum, at or below minimum in those utilities. Wastewater also has an issue with low reserves by the end of FY 2023 as well. Next slide, please. With respect to drought, I'm sorry, I had actually intended to update this. This shows drought as an upward pressure on rates. I think we changed it for the UAC to reflect to be determined. There are mixed signals with respect to the drought. We won't have a firm sense of its impacts on the electric and water utilities until April. And I know that that can sound, with all the talk about the massive snowpack in Tahoe and all of the rains in December, that can be a complicated and maybe surprising message to hear. But while those winter rains broke records, there hasn't been that much rain since in some of these watersheds. We've been getting some, and it's been making progress, and the effects were uneven. So, for example, the rain didn't hit the northern Sierra as much, and that's where most of the state's water and most of our hydropower comes from. And we still haven't reached average precipitation on an annual basis there yet. I think on average, the northern watersheds get about 53 inches, and we're only looking at about 44 inches or 45 inches last I checked today or yesterday. But in the south and the Sierras, where some of our hydropower comes from and most of the Bay Area's water comes from, precipitation's above average for the water year already. The biggest reservoirs in the state are still at levels below historical average, but on the other hand, there's a lot of snow in the Sierras, and that's the state's second reservoir, so that offsets it to some extent. And then there are also other factors that factor in here that determine how much water or hydropower we get from snow and rain, that include things like how much water gets absorbed into the dry ground, what are the drought regulations this year, environmental regulations that affect water flows, and then allocations of water between water and power users in the Central Valley Project. So in general, things are improving, but we're not going to really know until April definitively what the impact's going to be. Other factors include the need for increased capital investment due to aging infrastructure. You'll see that in the wastewater discussions tonight. We also have aging infrastructure in the electric utility, and of course, the need to modernize the grid as the community electrifies. And of course, over the last few years, we have seen inflation across the board. Construction inflation remains a difficult challenge for public agencies in the Bay Area, and other types of inflation are affecting all utility costs, including salary and benefit costs. Next slide, please. So this gives an overview of all of our proposals. And I just want to speak to a few things here. First, we included FY 2021 and FY 2022 just to show how much we were able to hold down utility rates and protect the community over those years. And then you can see the impact of very high energy prices in FY 2023. Most notable there is the 37% increase listed for the electric utility. That represents 3 rate changes. First, in April 2022, the activation of the hydroelectric rate adjuster. In July, the 5% increase to the base rates, and then the increase as of January 1st of the hydro rate adjuster from 13 cents at 1.3 cents to 4.8 cents. Because of those increases, we're not expecting to need to increase. We're not expecting people to see an increase in their electric bills for FY 2024. And in fact, if indications continue to improve for the drought for precipitation, we could even see a decrease. But we are definitely anticipating to decrease the hydroelectric rate adjuster by half or more. But at the same time, because revenues are so far below cost and reserves are so low, we're going to need a 14% increase. We're proposing a 14% increase in the electric utility that offsets those decreases. In the gas utility, we're showing you the rate changes just driven by the changes in distribution rates. So we have our gas supply rates and our distribution rates. The gas supply rates have been so variable that they kind of hide the proposals that we have for the distribution rates if you include them. So we'll talk about that more on March 21st. But right now, I think we just want to let you know that we are proposing a distribution increase that would have about an 8% increase on the overall rates. We do still expect that people's gas bills in FY 2024 would be lower than FY 2023 for the reasons I discussed earlier. You'll hear more about the 9% wastewater increase and the 7% water proposed increase tonight. So I won't talk more about that. In refuse, there's no proposed rate changes. And then in storm drain, we do have the CPI rate change proposed. The Public Works Department, I believe, we'll be talking about. Next slide, please. I'm not going to talk through these 4 slides, but I just wanted you to know that you have in your packet, cost containment is important to us as a utility. And what we have listed in here and the next slide and the following slide are things that we've done to reduce costs in the utility. And in the following slide, what we're planning to do in the future. While these items don't necessarily end up decreasing rates, they do reduce the rate of increase in rates, and we consider them very important for that reason. So I'll stop here and I'll turn it back over to Lisa Belier to talk about the water and wastewater, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
So before we go right into the water and wastewater, why don't we see if we have any questions on this informative overview. Colleagues, Greer?
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that presentation. That was helpful. I really liked seeing the projected change in residential median bills, because that was going to be one of my questions. Though I may have missed it. So for fiscal year 2024, the bottom it says 5% total monthly bill change, but you then mentioned, is that more 8%? So can you just go over that again? I think I may have misunderstood you.
All of the different utilities contribute to the residential bill in different amounts. So the electric makes a smaller contribution. Water can make a larger contribution. So 1% increase in one utility will have a different impact on the overall utility bill for the customer. So that at the bottom shows how much, when people hold that entire bill in their hands, how much they can expect that to increase from June to July, or from fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2024. So it's 5%, a 5% increase on the median residential bill. And I would say that when you take into account the expected decreases in gas supply costs is probably in the ballpark of 3 to 5%.
Okay, thank you. I don't know why I heard the 8% then, so I'm glad you clarified that. So total projected increases across all utilities through fiscal year 2028 looks like likely anticipated to be less than CPI increases per year. Would you say that?
It depends on what CPI ends up being over the next few
Right.
years, but it's in that ballpark.
The ballpark.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you know, so on to gas rates, do you know how those compare to other jurisdictions in California? I don't know if you
Yeah.
saw, but also, and for my colleagues as well, the Mercury today published had an article on how much California relies on imported natural gas and some of the reasons behind some of those gas rate spikes. And I think maybe a part of I think everyone's frustrated by those changes, but would be helpful for the public to be able to know, how much is this because of Palo Alto and how much of this is just because of the market that Palo Alto has no control over.
Yeah, these increases, and it really was January. In January, I have a slide that I wish I could show you that shows the spike, and I'll show it to you at the next meeting. But these increases happened across the West. They were more pronounced in California, but prices were hitting $3 to $4 a therm in many places, even outside of California. Nearly every utility in California experienced the same increases. I was charting Palo Alto's rates against SDG&E, SoCalGas, PG&E. Everybody saw those extreme increases in January in lockstep, except PG&E. I don't know. We don't know the reasons that Palo Alto's rates rose above PG&E's for that month, but I can tell you that for February, Palo Alto's rates went back to being significantly lower than PG&E's by somewhere in the ballpark of 20%. Now, average over the year, we're often in the 5% to 10% below PG&E for our residential rates, but it has been volatile over the winter. But I can say that this has been a West-wide issue. It's been a California-wide issue, and that's all been reflected in the call for, I think, investigations by the CPUC, CalISO, and Federal Electric Regulatory Commission to see if there's anything more to this than just fundamental factors, whether there's any market manipulation.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. And I'll hold off on my water utility questions until after that presentation, see if those questions are answered.
Julie?
Thank you, Pat. Hello, everyone. I'm new to the Finance Committee, delighted to be here. Also new to utility stuff, excited to learn. I am having trouble with the hydroelectric rate adjuster concept. I could probably go somewhere and get a primer on what that means, but if somebody could give me like the brief overview on what that is, what it does, why it matters. Clearly it does, but
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
So I'll give that to you in just a sentence or two, but we'll be able to dig more deeply into that on March 21st. And I'm also happy to answer questions offline as well. So the hydroelectric rate adjuster is a rate adjuster that's activated when we see persistent, continuing low hydroelectric generation due to drought. This low generation from our hydroelectric resources can increase our overall costs. We try to absorb that from reserves, and we are usually able to do that for a couple of years. But when drought lasts for a really extended period, the reserves become exhausted, and we end up needing to have a temporary rate adjuster in place to recover those additional costs.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Jonathan.
Let me try to add on to that. John, correct me if I get any of this wrong, but basically we have two large hydro contracts that we're part of with Northern California Power Authority. And we have nearly fixed costs for those contracts, regardless of how much hydropower is generated. So in wet years, we're producing a lot of electricity on the same cost. In drought years, our costs stay almost the same, but we get a lot less electricity, and therefore the cost per watt goes up a lot. Is that roughly correct, John?
Yeah, that's dead on. And I'll just add that during those wet years, that's when we try to restore those reserves that we use to carry us through the dry years. We just end up having to use the adjuster during an extended drought like we've been experiencing.
And just as a follow-up to that, can you refresh us on which reservoirs or sections of the state we have on our two big hydro contracts that we share in?
Yeah, most of the hydroelectric power, most of the large reservoirs are from the Lake Shasta. So in that northern part of the state. And then there are several smaller hydroelectric generators as well through other parts of the state as well.
The Calaveras group, is that essentially
So
Calaveras?
Calaveras is our second hydroelectric resource,
Right.
and that was developed by Northern California Power Agency, which is the joint powers agency we belong to with other public power utilities. And that is entirely reserved for those public power utilities that developed it, whereas the Central Valley project has a lot of different stakeholders going well beyond power producers. And that is a significantly smaller part of is about a third of the generation of what we get from the Central Valley project. But yes, the Calaveras is in that Southern Sierra watershed. And so it's getting significantly more snowpack.
Thanks. And that 2/3, 1/3 is a real helpful clarification. As you noted, the far north of Trinity and Shasta reservoirs have not to date received the super heavy rainfall that we've had in the Northern Sierra, the Central and the Southern Sierra. It certainly looks that not only from the rainfall that we've received to date, but what is projected for the balance of March at a minimum, that the Sierra, which, Shasta is not technically part of the Sierra, and it's this year to date has been getting bypassed on the most severe storms, although the projections for this next set are scheduled to hit that area harder, and we hope so. But the Sierra is a very good chance it's going to approach the highest precipitation in 70 years with now what we're seeing on the horizon. And that certainly affects our water resources and then affects 1/3 of our electric hydro resources. So that will be very interesting to monitor. And thanks also for that kind of overview on the comparison versus PG&E on the gas rates, because that's been one question that we to date haven't really been providing our public, when we had a month or two where we went from traditionally below PG&E gas rates to above. And I hadn't heard until tonight that we are now back below in this whole volatile period. That's good news. But I'm looking forward to, in 2 weeks, getting the deeper dive explanation of what affected PG&E versus what affected us, and what we all have in common in kind of the California and the Western US. So that will be very important as well. Last thing is, when we look at on your slide 7, I think, yeah, this one, sorry, that we have in front of us. When we look at a 5% increase for this year, that's 5% on top of the 2023 rates, which, if I understand them correctly, included these big spikes, both the e-hydro increases and the unanticipated gas spike. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm sorry, I'm having a momentary technical issue here. Yes, that is correct. However, what I will say is that yes, so it is a 5% increase overall on the FY 2023 bill that does include all of those changes. And what I will say is, though, that the decline in gas rates and any potential electric decline in the hydroelectric rate adjuster is not reflected there. And so I'd say it's probably more like a 3% to 5% increase.
That's good to hear. And I was struggling with this graph, or this table only shows a 4% gas rate increase. Can you explain why it's only 4% with that big spike that we've had in the winter?
Yeah, so it's because this line right now only reflects the change that's caused by increases in the distribution rates. So it doesn't factor in gas supply at all. And what we'll show you on March 21st is what that same chart looks like with the gas supply included. And you see really significant increases in FY 2023 and then a really significant decrease in FY 2024, if you do it that way. We didn't show it that way on this chart because it makes it very hard to see what our actual rate proposal is.
Okay, that's informative. This chart, the way it's labeled, doesn't imply that.
Yeah.
And I think for the public, that would be important to make that distinction that you just described. Okay, on that note, let's go ahead and have Lisa provide the updates on the water utility.
Thank you so much. My name is Lisa Belier, Acting Senior Resource Planner in the Utilities Department, and I'd like to talk to you about the water utility. And I'm going to hit some of the highlights of the slides so that there'll be more time to focus on any questions that you may have. So for the water utility, the overall increase is a 7% increase, and there's two components of that increase. One is a 3% distribution rate increase, which increases the distribution rates that pay for the distribution system in Palo Alto to maintain the system and the infrastructure. The second component is an 11.6% projected increase in the commodity rate, which is to the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, who provides all of the potable water to the city of Palo Alto. And that is a pass-through rate, and it's a projection right now, but we will know the final rate increase proposal in May, and then we will provide notice to customers and pass through that rate increase expected July 1st. So that will bring the price per CCF from the current rate of $4.75 up to the $5.30 listed on the slide. The water utility has healthy reserves, and we are planning, as part of this rate proposal, to utilize those reserves together with the rate increases in order to reduce the need for the rate increase. So that's how we've managed to propose the 3% distribution increase in 2024. The overall increase in the next subsequent 4 years is between 3% and 5% annually. And I wanted to also say that in order to utilize the funding in the rate stabilization reserve, we're proposing a $3 million transfer from the rate stabilization reserve to the operations reserve this year, and a $3.7 million transfer from the CIP reserve to the operations reserve. So that CIP reserve transfer will pay for the needed infrastructure upgrades, including the including some of the upgrades on some of the reservoirs for seismic reasons. The rate stabilization transfer will serve to stabilize the rates and reduce the need to increase the rates. And I wanted to touch on, there's 3 reasons that SFPUC is proposing to increase the commodity rate. And those are increased capital spending, which will increase their debt service that will need to be paying for. The second is they had a large balancing account owed to wholesale customers, including Palo Alto. By the end of this fiscal year, that balancing account will be exhausted. So there will be no funding left to blunt any rate increases needed. And the third reason is that their projections for the region in terms of the amount of water being sold are still depressed from the drought impacts. This chart shows the costs and revenue for the water utility. The bars, the stacked bars show the costs, and you can see the blue bars show the water supply. Those are the commodity costs that I was mentioning, increasing in 2023 and 2024. The green bars show the operations costs increasing over time, and those are primarily driven by salary and benefit increases. And then the orange bars are staying relatively consistent over the projected years. You can see the blue line is the revenue, and it's going down it went down in 2022 with reduced sales during the drought, and we're projecting that it'll remain down in 2023 and slowly recover over time. And you can see that the cost bars are well above the revenue, and that's because of this proposal that I mentioned to you, where we're utilizing those reserves in order to reduce the need to increase rates in the short term. And the proposal is the 7%. That's the first red number listed above fiscal year 2024. The operations reserve and CIP reserve will remain within the guideline under this projection throughout the forecast period. And so with that, I'm going to jump to the recommendation. It's not letting me jump there, but I'm going to go to the recommendation. And I wanted to mention that we did bring this proposal to the UAC last Wednesday, and the UAC unanimously supported the staff proposal. And what's listed on the slide is we're requesting a resolution for adopting the financial plan, the 3.7 million transfer from the CIP reserve to the operations reserve, the 3 million transfer that I mentioned from the rate stabilization reserve to the operations reserve, and the rate increase in the rate schedules that we've presented. And with that, I'd be happy to go to any areas that you have questions on.
Thank you. Greer?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the report. So the report the staff report stated that water revenues down because of customer response to water conservation calls. So does that mean that the efforts kind of regionally and here in the city really actually worked for those conservation? Because I remember it wasn't just a few months ago that there was great concern that customers were not responding adequately to these calls for water conservation. So can you kind of speak to that?
Yes, regionally in the last year, there was an overall reduction. I think the regional number is about 11%, which is in line with what SFPUC was calling for. In San Francisco, in the city of San Francisco, for their retail customers, they actually reduced a little bit more than the wholesale customers as a whole. I think in Palo Alto specifically, in the first 6 months of last year, the community didn't reduce as much as a whole as what we had requested or hoped for. That was primarily driven, I think, because of the dry weather in the first part of the year. But during the second part of the year, after the council implemented water use restriction policies, including the 2-day per week watering, the community really achieved a lot of reductions in the second half of the year, in line with the request, with the desired reductions of about 11%, which was the call from SFPUC.
Okay, well, I'm glad people finally heard the emergency call and responded to it. I would imagine that, given that we've been in a drought for so long and that we've all been so used to hearing these calls for conservation, that I I can see it being a little longer for people to start recorrecting their habits and going back to non-drought year behavior. So glad to see it looks like we're kind of doing a more cautious approach, but it'll be interesting to see how behaviors change, because can't recall the last time we were coming out of such a major drought. Do customers see, so with the bill pass through of the bill portion through the SFPUC, do customers see, do they see that number that's associated with the SFPUC rate, or is it just all lumped into one single water utility rate?
They do, the rate schedules list out the amount, the $4.75. And they're, and it is separated out on the bill. You can see the commodity charge on the bill.
Okay, that's good. And then, okay, again, this chart helped understand better on the aggregate. So going to table 7 on the staff report, I think it was packet page 12, it showed estimated monthly bill, and then below that is estimated bill impact. And I didn't really understand the difference between those two figures.
Okay, I'm with you at table 7.
Table 7. Sorry, pulling it up myself here. So I didn't really, yes, I just didn't understand. It said estimated monthly bill, and then it says estimated monthly bill impact, and then it says dollar per month.
Right.
What is that? Can you explain the difference between those two?
Yeah, thanks
Clearly a
for
big
that
monetary
question.
difference.
So the estimated monthly bill, this could have been labeled better, so we'll try to strive to improve the labeling. But the monthly bill is showing the increase in the year from the year prior to the increase. So this increase is about $6.60 is what it amounts to. This 7% overall rate increase will affect a residential customer by about $6.60 in fiscal year 2024.
Gotcha.
And then the overall bill impact row is supposed to be indicating the difference between the median monthly bill in 2023 and then what that median monthly bill will be in 2024.
Okay, so FY 2023 would be 105.06 minus 660.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. And then just one final question. So our water rates are designed to really kind of just recover the city's costs associated with water distribution and to maintain adequate financial reserves. That seems to be the goal of these rates.
That's exactly correct.
Okay, and so what are, I wasn't able to see, like, what are the current financial reserves? Yeah.
If you
Just the monetary amount, do you know where to direct me to on that one?
If you go to the financial plan, you can look at the table. I think it's Appendix B at the back of the financial plan. If you look in the staff report, it's a linked document is what it's called.
Okay.
So it says financial plan linked document. At the end of fiscal year 2022, there was about $14 million in the operations reserve, $9 million in the rate stabilization reserve, and $10.7 million in the CIP reserve. So that's kind of the total. But if you look at the financial plan, you can see that in the table Appendix B.
And do we have a council policy on where those reserves should be?
Yes, each of the reserves have a policy, and it's stated in the back of the financial plan. There's a guideline. So as part of this resolution, the council would actually be kind of okaying that version of the policy that's included in the financial plan, and there's no change in it from the previous year.
Great. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Julie.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, so much. I'm wrestling with the tension between the desire to conserve water for reasons of ecology and sustainability and climate, and yet we need the revenue from water sales. And I'm just curious about how we balance this in our thinking and our prioritizing. In particular, I noted that there's this drought surcharge, and curious as to how we narrate it to lay people, to to the average Palo Alton, it looks like people are effectively paying for water we have told them they can't use. And so I just love a sense of how we balance these things and speak about them.
So what I would say right now is that there is a placeholder on the rate schedules for the drought surcharge, but we're not charging the drought surcharge and we're not planning to charge the drought surcharge during this drought. What the activity that's happening right now is we are returning to the drought surcharge calculation with a consultant and working on revising that calculation so that it will be ready when we enter into another drought or in case this drought continues.
Okay, and to the larger tension of we provide water as a utility, and when water is not in great use, we sort of have to accommodate that. Help me understand that. How do we think about that? How do we think about the future of water?
Okay, you want to say something?
That's a great question. Carla Daly, acting assistant director. It is a tricky message when we do need to implement the drought surcharge. And it really is not it's not a tool for getting people to conserve more. It is a revenue, it's a mechanism to make up for the lost revenue. And part of the message that we try to communicate is that even though folks end up paying more per unit of water that they consume, that their bill should be lower if they are conserving water. So that's the message that we try and get out there. But it is a tricky one, and a lot of people are, legitimately have questions about that when we do
Thank
need
you.
to implement the surcharge.
My next question is, I was struck by the fact that fire services seem to get quite a break in cost for the same meter size. And I'm wondering if that is just a matter of public policy or if I'm missing something in trying to analyze these numbers.
Could you tell me where you're seeing that? Those.
See if I can find where I've seen it. Let's see.
And let me give it a try too. That is a service that is very rarely used. It's
Okay.
really for the case of having to put out a fire. And so that charge is more or less to reserve capacity if it's needed, but it's a very, very small amount of water. So
Okay. I was looking at tables 3 and 4, I guess. The current and proposed monthly service charges for W4 and W7 versus current and proposed for fire services W3, and just looking at the size of the meters, the amount of water you get presumably is the same if the meter is the same size, but so fire folks are being charged a whole lot less.
It's really more of a ready to serve charge in the event that it's needed, but it's
Okay.
really not used.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
So a couple phones. Carla, you had mentioned this importance of conveying to the public that when we have conservation, whether it's and use less water or use less gas or electricity, or create less solid waste that is landfilled versus what's recycled. We have a common perception that by residents that you're penalizing me for conserving. And as you stated, what we see is that if I have a 10% increase in my water costs per gallon, but I use 10% less water, my bill didn't go up. And for a long while, I felt that we don't highlight that well enough. And I'm glad that you pointed it out. And I just want to encourage, as we go forward with this year in particular, after these big spikes, that we put that context out there as a reminder. It stating it one time won't really get it through to everyone. Connected with that, we also see over time a great concern that how can we have significantly new housing or development when we have the state looking at drought periods, or even just a limited long-term supply of water, regardless of the fluctuations from drought and surplus periods. And when we look at our long-term usage of water, and for that matter, gas and electric, they have been on very significant declines over time, even with growth. And we periodically get those graphs, but putting them front and center again, I think, is an extremely important message to the community, that we have seen our water use decline, 40% over the last 20-something years, depending on whether it's a drought year or not, while we have had growth. Some of that is because we have had fewer industrial users, but that really happened 20, 30 years ago. That's not such a recent phenomena. And so through all the measures of having wiser, more constrained shower heads, to drip irrigation, to replacing big turf areas in our homes with natural vegetation, all of that has shown a steady decline in water use. Then the other message, if that's true, the resident says, well, why am I being asked to conserve so much in a drought? And certainly part of the answer to that is that we have these fluctuations, and we're going to have even more extreme fluctuations with climate change between heavy rainfall periods and drought periods. And that volatility is projected to become even more exacerbated over time, and a real management problem of our supplies. But there's one other dimension that we need to remind the public of, and that is that many of the drought restrictions are imposed at a statewide level. And some of them are through our supplier of San Francisco's PUC. We call it our Hetch Hetchy water, although it's multiple reservoirs. And so they have their own to conserve water in a prolonged drought period, like we have. I will say not that we're not just emerging from, we have emerged from, and I'm going to be prepared to take that position. But the Hetch Hetchy system is probably in the best situation of any water system in the state on an ongoing basis. And the reason for that is that 20 or so years ago, up until then, in droughts, San Francisco gets hydroelectric power and water from the Hetch Hetchy system, whereas all of the rest of us in Bosca, their customer base, get just water. And in drought years, San Francisco was continuing to pump water out of the reservoirs that we needed for water supply, and they were pumping it out in a drought to produce cheap hydro. And that policy changed. And that's when we went from having periods in a drought where Hetch Hetchy's water volume would get precariously low to a period where it's really as good as any system in the state. And we're paying for that. We get both highest water quality, but we also now have less risk of inadequate water supply than almost any water system in the state. And that's part of the story that we need to convey to our ratepayers. So there's several high-level messages, but I think they're things that people can understand if we put them clearly and repeatedly, and they'll get it. better than they do today. So I really encourage us to do that. Then I know that the reserves for water and otherwise are in these linked long-term financial plans. That's an extensive document. It's linked in our reports. I would encourage extracting key tables on those reserves and putting them in the actual report to the council and the public. And we won't need to read that whole financial plan, although it's available to us, but that's a key component that's driving that. And as well as, Lisa, you kind of touched on how these reserves are actually, we have multiple reserves and we make decisions to say, well, one reserve is above our target and another reserve is below. And we actually have fungibility between those reserves. We can make a policy decision to move funds from one surplus reserve to one that's in shortage in a given year. And to put that out clearly for the council and the public as well, so that we really understand what are these moving pieces and that they're not being moved behind a curtain. It's right out in front. Here's what we're doing and why. So then the last thing and the more substantive thing that I wanted to go forward on is we have on slide 17, as you were pointing out, these differences in water supply. And I think you said that the projection is not much of an increase in consumption this coming fiscal year because we're still in this transition between a drought period and a normal period. First, when I see on this table, FY24 does look like a significant increase in water supply. And we don't have the actual table numbers, but am I misreading that? Or what is the projection in water supply between the fiscal year we're in right now and the coming one?
You are right. I thought if I said that it was not a big increase, I misspoke. It is a significant increase. There's a price increase that SFPUC is projecting at 11.6% per unit. And so that's reflected in the bar going from the 2023 to 2024. And
so out of that 11.6%, you had said a portion of that's the capital spending.
Yes.
And, we've had a whole number of years where this whole Hetch Hetchy transmission system has been rebuilt. Is that part of that ongoing investment?
It is part of it, yes. So,
and then how much of the 11.6% commodity rate increase is tied to the water use projections, and what are they currently projecting at SFPUC? And lastly, when did they last make those projections?
The latest projection that we have from them is from mid-February. I do not have a breakdown like by percentage of what portion of the 11.6% comes from which of those three sources, but they've provided those as the top three drivers. And I can try to find out.
That would be helpful.
What the percentage breakdown is.
And the reason I'm pushing on that is because I appreciate that agencies, including SFPUC, and to a degree ourselves, are institutionally conservative in projections. And that includes that when we're pivoting from a severe drought to what may be a significant surplus in water. I actually think that for the Hetch Hetchy system, we're liable to see just at capacity in the coming months. We not only have this southern, and this in the northern part of the Southern Sierras, that system. We not only have 200+% of normal, And we have weeks ahead of us of what looks like extremely wet conditions for the second half of March. And you put those things compounded, and we are likely to have very full reservoirs there. As we talked about earlier, Northern Sierra, or actually the Shasta and Trinity area, which is not truly Sierra, is in a different boat. But these reservoirs of Pardee, Eleanor Pardee, of Cherry Lake, Hetch Hetchy, and then downstream Don Pedro. That set of reservoirs that make the Hetch Hetchy system are liable to be just packed. And even though SFPUC has not yet acknowledged that change, I mean, mid-February, it was still, things are promising, but let's be conservative. By early March, geez, it's even more solid. Unless suddenly we get the next couple of weeks of a drastic change from what is being forecast, it's a gangbuster water year. And we may have more problems with ability to store water than we have problems with having enough water. So that all leads to my hesitancy to include the portion of the commodity rate increase that is attributed to water use projections still being anything retarded due to water supply limitations. I'm hesitant to build that into our rates, even if SFPUC has not given us the green light.
Yeah, I would just add to that it really is sales that drive these rates. And you kind of started to allude to that in the last part of your comments. And as we've seen in our own water sales, for better or for worse, it takes a while for people to start using more water again. Again, it's that tension between conserving and sales. And so even with a full system, that doesn't mean people go back to using.
Well, that's right. It's exactly right. When we get in patterns of conserving water, it takes us a little while to adjust to normal again. It's exactly true. That's a good point. So then it's a question of how much of that projection that SFPUC is making on water use projections is based upon inhibited demand versus expecting that constraints on supply will inhibit that demand. And I don't know the answer to that, but we have both factors. We're going to have a lot of water this year available. Okay. That's a lot of, and as we all talk, this is a convergence of a lot of different factors that go into these rates. So you had said that basically we're mitigating that increase by also using our reserves. Did I understand that right?
Yes, that's correct. We're proposing to use so just to clarify, when you say that increase,
the proposed increase
on all that we can do is mitigate the distribution increase with the reserves. So we're trying to, what the council can approve is the distribution rate increase. So what I'm trying to say is that we're trying to limit that distribution increase by using the reserves that are available in the different reserves that I mentioned.
So we can't use a reserve to mitigate the projected commodity cost increase.
Actually, I guess we could try to do that. Yeah, we could use reserves and pay for our costs of the purchased water.
So can you give us an overview of where we are on those reserves? I know it's in the long-term forecast, but where do we stand on those?
I can show you the charts of the CAP reserve and the operations reserve.
Great.
So this is the operations reserve, and you can see that at the end of fiscal year 22, it's at the top of the guideline range. And then throughout the forecast period, it remains within the range, but does dip down closer to the minimum. So that's the operations reserve. And then the CIP reserve is here, and you can see that again, at the end of fiscal year 2022, it's close to the top of the guideline range. And it begins to decline as we have some infrastructure projects, and it goes up and down as we do this every other year main replacement strategy to try to make our main replacement projects large in the even years. So that's why that fluctuates up and down, but it remains within the guideline range throughout the period.
So if we were willing to try to further mitigate the water rate increases by utilizing a bit more of our reserves, the capital reserve is way above the well, let's see, that says min max guideline, but is that a min or a max?
The max is the one at the top and
I
the
see.
min is the one at the bottom.
Oh,
but
okay.
You're,
The bars,
they
yep.
don't have a different color. So yeah,
Yep. No,
sorry
I
if
get
that's
it. I get it.
confusing.
So we would be dipping close to the min, the way
In fiscal year 26. That's right.
and 24.
And in 2024. Yes.
Yeah. So 24 is the one we're looking at. And that was the one that I was hoping we might have some ability to go further, but we don't want to get too close to our min.
Right. But what I haven't shown you is a chart of the rate stabilization reserve that
Okay.
currently has $9 million in it. So this proposal would be to take $3 million out each year for the next 3 years in order to reduce the amount of rate increases needed. So you could use it more quickly, but then you'd have larger rate increases in the future. That's certainly an option.
Assuming that that we don't have increased consumption that would mitigate the projected cost increase from water use being limited. You know, you alluded to how this 11.6% commodity, some proportion of that is based on water use projections. If water use goes up, then greater than SFPUC is projecting, then that would reduce the projected commodity rate increase. Is that correct?
We will know that in May, because in April, the SFPUC will make their preliminary projection, or they've already made a preliminary projection. They'll update it in April, and they'll have their final hearing in May to decide whether it will be 11.6 or a different number.
So if it's a lower number at that time, based upon them projecting higher water use from higher volume availability, but we've already adjusted our rates, is that, or it's just
No, this is going to be a
fluctuate?
pass through.
It's a
So we
pass-through.
will give customers
got it.
30 days notice and pass through whatever the rate increase is, unless, yeah, that's what we're planning to do.
Okay, thank you. So then we would need to take action on this item before proceeding to the second. And so can we see the staff recommendation again? And that correlates to a percentage increase. You had told us that's a 7%.
A 7% overall and a 3% on the distribution rates.
That's a big bump, and I'm just looking in the part of the issue for us tonight is that we're needing to look at these not only as the factors driving that individual commodity and utility of water, but this whole package and its impact on our ratepayers. And that's actually it's the second highest, no, third highest bump, but it's a significant increase. And I'm struggling whether there's any way to hold off on that level of increase pending the updates that we receive from SFPUC. So would there be a potential for us to say, at this point in time, we're going to authorize X, and when we have those numbers and come back with the maybe in our budget cycle, look at whether we need to add Y or not add Y above what we would approve tonight? Is that a possibility? Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I want to understand your question a little bit better. The way we've designed this rate, the SFPUC charge is a pass through straight away, like whether it goes up or down, it is going to be a pass through. And so the proposal in front of you to use reserves just applies to the distribution part of the rate.
And just to clarify for me, so the 7%, does that include the anticipated pass through or not?
Yes.
Okay.
And whether the SFPUC rate ends up being higher or lower than we think it will be today, the proposal for how to use reserves doesn't change.
Right.
We would still be hitting that minimum in those years, and we would still be, if we used more reserves sooner rather than later, we'd still be looking at higher rate increases down the road.
And so even if we doubt whether the pass-through will be as high as they're currently projecting, we don't have a good mechanism to hold back on their projection at this point in time. We've got to build that projection, their current projection, into our proposed increases.
We are building their projection into our projection of what the rate increase will look like, but our design of how to hold distribution rates down as low as possible doesn't change.
Right, I got that. Yeah.
Can I ask the 7% change that is at issue right now? If I'm looking at the chart correctly on page 7, it amounts to a $6.90 fee increase on the monthly bill, right? So in terms of the impact on our public, we're talking about under $7 a month, $84 a year increase if we approve the 7%, right?
Right.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah. Well, my concern isn't that in isolation, it's the entire package of utility increases. And that's where it becomes more problematic. If that was our only significant increase, I'm a lot more sanguine on that. But as you've explained it, I'm not seeing really an alternative other than to project or put in our projected rate increases what is currently SFPUC's projected pass-through on the commodity. Okay.
That's one question.
Yeah.
And then just the future years on the water utility, I mean, it drops significantly. Is the assumption there out of the drought and operating normally? And I guess customer behavior being normal.
For Palo Alto's so what that chart is showing is the combination in each year of the commodity rate increase and the Palo Alto distribution increase, and it's between 3% and 5%. The Palo Alto distribution increase in each year incorporates a slow, return to a little bit lower than normal water usage. On the commodity side, SFPUC is projecting, this increase in the next upcoming year, and then a relatively flat rate projection over the next several years with a little bit of inflationary increase. I'm not exactly sure what their demand forecast is included in each of those years.
Okay. Because I think that'd be interesting to see, is there an assumption that now that we are coming out of the drought, if not out of the drought already across the state, is the assumption that we're not going to return to it in a couple of years? I don't know how we can possibly make that prediction. So I think I'd be curious about that. But I understand. Dean, do you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted to add one thing quick.
Okay, that's all I had.
One just last thing I wanted to add, Chair Burt. So as you heard from Jonathan earlier today, one of the things is you look at this overall package that we're talking about. There's a strong possibility, as we talked earlier about, with all the consumption of the snow and water, that our hydro rates, and now we could also maybe drop that hydro rate adjuster even lower than the 50% that we're dropping it into what you're seeing in tonight's rates. So as you see that overall package, we may see that the bottom line dollar amounts as a whole will go down even a little bit further than that.
Yeah, I share that hope and to some degree anticipation.
Could I ask another clarifying question? Am I correct in, as I look at these numbers, in seeing that the 7% rate is a combination, close to 50-50 combination, the projected increase in the commodity rate and the cost of distributing water? Is that correct?
Exactly.
So that if the pass through from SFPUC turns out to be less than, then we are going to see a significant decrease in the monthly rate.
Moderate decrease.
Okay, it depends on what the pass through decrease is.
Yeah, well,
But it is 50% of the cost is what is that commodity price.
yeah, but the commodity is actually has capital spending and another category, and then the water use. So it's only really the water use that we expect could drop.
I
So
see.
it's
The
only
portion of the pass through that is water use is a smaller percentage that I'm appreciating.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay. I guess at this time, entertain a motion on the recommendation to the council.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion?
No.
No.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously. All right. Now we will move on to our next item, which is the water collection utility financial staff recommendation on the water collection utility, I'll just say. And Lisa, are you presenting that? Go right ahead.
Yes. Okay. But for the wastewater utility, this is a 9% overall rate increase projection, which is $4 per month for an average residential customer. There are two main drivers for the rate increase proposal. One is the treatment plant cost increases over the next several years. They're planning for debt service increases and loan repayment increases to really pay for upgrades at the treatment plant. There's many components of the treatment plant that have been in service for over 40 years, and they provide service to the residents and businesses in Palo Alto 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And many of those components need to be replaced. And so there's upcoming costs associated with the treatment plant that are included and planned for in this forecast for the wastewater collection utility. The other component of the increase is to accelerate the rate of sewer main replacement from the 1 mile per year, which is the average rate over the past several years, to a 2.5 mile per year rate starting in fiscal year 2026. And the goal of this is to replace the mains within their life expectancy, or as close to their life expectancy as possible. Last year, we did bring this proposal to the UAC and to the Finance Committee, and the recommendation and alternatives included here are to try to be responsive to the recommendations from the Finance Committee and the UAC from last year. And so the recommendation is to achieve that 2.5 miles per year in 2026. And the three alternatives achieves that same rate of acceleration to 2.5 miles per year, but at a later date. So the alternative A mitigates the rate increase needed with only 1 year of 9% increase, but doesn't get to the 2.5 miles per year until 2028. Alternative B reduces the rate increase needed to 7% in the upcoming year, but doesn't get to the rate of main replacement and at 2.5 miles per year until 2034. And alternative C limits the rate increase every year to 5%, but doesn't get to the 2.5 miles per year until 2034. So we're getting further and further from the 100-year life expectancy of the pipes. And by doing that, we increase the likelihood of increasing the repair and maintenance costs and having other impacts on the pipes, including overflows and sinkholes. So I just wanted to show you a couple of pictures of the types of pipes that are prioritized in the main replacement program. These are pictures of mains that have structural defects. So they have broken pipes or missing sections. And I wanted to show you, if it works, a brief picture video, 7 seconds, of one of these pipeline sections that has a missing section. So this is a structural defect that can't be addressed through routine maintenance type of activity.
Where does that water go?
To the treatment plant, the regional.
Oh, sorry, when it's broken. Yeah. It
Oh,
just goes into the ground and then. Yes.
I want to thank Dean for crawling down there and taking this photo.
Best for you.
so this is a picture of the costs and revenue for the wastewater utility. We have the costs in the stacked bars, and you can see the light and dark blues are the treatment costs. The light blue is the treatment operations costs, and the dark blue is the treatment capital and debt. And you can see the increases over time over the next 5 years. And then the collection, on the collection system, I wanted to point out the orange bars, which is the increase in the capital and debt needed over the next several years. And you can see the revenue did decline a little bit during the COVID time period and is recovering and projected to increase over the next 5 years. And I wanted to just mention, we talked a little bit about reserves. For the operations reserve, it's projected to remain within the guideline ranges. And then for the CIP reserve, there's a separate reason why it drops down to 0. And that is because for the ongoing main replacement that's happening right now, or projected to happen this year, it needs to move. It was budgeted in 2024, but because of a budget change, we need to move it to 2023 in order to coordinate with Caltrans on repaving on El Camino. And so that by moving it to 2023, there was less time to accumulate funding for that project, and that's why it temporarily goes to 0. And what this chart shows is that we have a plan to bring that reserve back into the guideline range over the next 5 years. And with that, I wanted to tell you about our recommendation. Which is, again, we discussed this with the Utility Advisory Commission last week, who unanimously approved the staff recommendation for the financial plan, including the 9% overall increase, a transfer from the CIP reserve, the 3.2 million, to the operations reserve to fund the main replacement. The use of the remaining 342,000 from the rate stabilization reserve by transferring those funds to the operations reserve. And then the rate schedules. So with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Julie?
Thank you so much, Lisa. I am struck by this 100-year thing and how we've got mains that were installed in the 1950 to 1970 range. And here we are having to face a tough fiscal decision of whether we go with the recommendation or one of the alternatives, facing a set of costs today that others might have prevented us from having to face had they done the necessary replacement in earlier years. And I'm struck by the fact that if we don't make the tough decision now, we're just kicking that can further down the street and potentially facing this sort of, some element of these mains will not be replaced in the 100-year time frame. And then we face sinkholes and other potential problems that people will be up in arms that we allowed to happen. So I'm sort of curious as to how reliable are these 100-year things? What evidence do we have from surrounding communities that these mains really do rupture in 102 or 108 or not really till 132 years? Like what kind of evidence do we have of the degree of risk that we're taking if we don't fully replace all the mains in their 100-year lifetime?
Yeah, good question. My name's Matt Zuka. I am the Assistant Director for Water, Gas, and Wastewater. So I'll try to answer that one. The short answer is it's not a precise formula. It's sort of based upon, I would say, industry experience, and we have to make assumptions sort of about the overall life cycle. So some of them are going to probably fail at 50, 60, 70, 80 years, and some of them might last longer. So it's really kind of an average. And there's a lot of different factors that are going to go into that. Some of it could be soil conditions, groundwater levels, the depth of the pipe, a bunch of different factors. So really what we're trying to do is lay out a plan here where, and it's actually, I've said this in some of the previous presentations, it's a really good place to be trying to plan around the entire life cycle of an asset. A lot of times what you'll see cities doing is they'll identify a bunch of deficiencies, figure out how much it's going to take to fix just those deficiencies, but they're not thinking about the whole, we're going to get to the end of the Golden Gate Bridge at some point, and we're going to have to start over again. And that's kind of what we're really trying to do here. So the bottom line is it's not a precise estimate. What we do know is that the last 2 years of that asset, though, so when you see some of the tables that say, hey, it's 2020 or it's 2028, not 2028, what was the year? I can't remember the last one off the top of my head. But some of those outer years where they're in, those last 2 years of that asset are not the same. Thank you. The outer years of that asset aren't going to be the same as the first couple of years of that asset. And so not all years are created equal. And when we start looking at going much beyond, even at 108 years, which is what the current rate structure proposes, we're still 8% beyond the best guess that we have of what that life cycle is going to be. So every extra year is another percent, if you will, on that. And it's the worst year that we're borrowing from for that asset. So it's not a precise science, the best we can do. And it's sort of a good planning level number.
Can I just clarify, what do you mean by it's the worst year we're borrowing from in
Sure.
the life cycle of that asset?
So if I look at the asset, like for example, the pictures that you saw, those are the ones that are at the end of their useful life that we want to get rid of. The longer we leave those in the ground, the worse, the more likelihood we're going to have of a failure, the more likelihood there is of a SSO. And so those are the worst years that we want to extend. So that's kind of the rub, right? Is that going from 108-year asset life to 115 or 14 or whatever, those last few years are the really problematic ones, and we're extending it there. I can't borrow from the first 10. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Sometimes these jargon terms, SSO, sanitary sewer overflow. So we have, thank you for asking me to define that. Yeah, so let me back up. When these pipes fail, we have a sewage flowing. That happens 24/7. As Karin can attest to, the plant receives that all day long, every day. We also have issues that will exacerbate the sewage flow, which we call I&I, another jargon nickname, but it's inflow and infiltration. So when we get rain events, on top of the normal sewage flow in the pipes, we'll also get an increase in flow just from infiltration, groundwater, rainfall going over manholes, that kind of thing. And when the condition of the sewer pipes deteriorates and no longer can pass the flow along, can no longer move the solids, and it'll back up and then it overflows through a manhole and it goes into a creek. Those are things that we monitor. We have to report that. There is a fair amount of, I would say, environmental liability that the city would carry if we start having a number of those reach the creek. That is sort of protected under the Clean Water Act. So we certainly want to be managing our sewage infrastructure to mitigate that.
Thanks. So the incremental increase each year itself doesn't seem all that bad, but I think kind of going back to the chair's point in the last item, more concerned about the aggregate, and by fiscal year 28 seems like it's a pretty significant increase over that time. I mean, over $20 a month from now until then. And I think for many customers, it's going to be really surprising to go from us being 28% lower than a lot of our neighboring communities to actually 5% higher. So, kind kind of understanding, but interested to see if it's similar to the last item where there's not much that we can really do with that. And also how likely, just based on historic trends, is it that those rates may be lowered if circumstances change?
Just on the reference that you're making to the 5% higher than the neighboring communities, that does assume that the neighboring communities don't increase their rates at all over the next 5 years. So that we thought that was a kind of a conservative estimate, because other communities are likely facing maybe similar situations or treatment cost increases that they have to pay for. I think I didn't answer your second part of your question.
Well, and let's burrow in on that a little bit, because I recall from last year, I think it was on the presentation, when we were looking at, we're in just entering a once in 2 generation investment in rebuilding our wastewater treatment plant. And while we were looking at bids on that, we were seeing, and part of our concern was the bids were coming in above original estimates. But we looked at some of the other agencies in the sub-region that were going through similar rebuilds, and they were experiencing bids coming in as much or higher above projections than we were. If I remember right, one of them was Hayward. And is that correct? And they're doing a major rebuild? Or am I mixing that up? It wasn't Hayward? Okay.
I think every solution in the Bay Area is doing a rebuild, so.
Yeah. So we've got this collection system and then the treatment plant, which are the 2 big factors in this. And the other communities are liable to have similar needs on collection, and they're going to similar rebuilds, not all at the same pace. Basically, our rebuild of our plant is overdue. And I had, for a number of years, had thought that we should be, because we were so much below neighboring communities. When you look at Los Altos and Mountain View, they're the same wastewater treatment plant as us. And so we're all in the same ballpark. We compare it to our neighbors to the north of Menlo Park, Redwood City, or we're sharing the same one. And it's double the wastewater treatment rates. And it means that we really were holding back on charging our customers for the necessary capital investments that were on the horizon. And now we're charging them real time as we're building that. I frankly think we should have built up that capital reserve even more and spread that increase over time, because we were half the cost of our neighbors. But we are where we are on that. I will say that I fully agree with staff that the other neighboring communities are going to have similar, not identical, increases on both their collection system and then their treatment plant capital costs.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, because we're seeing this with issues of, always making the argument of Palo Alto utilities compared to PG&E and trying to make those comparisons. But I think at the end of the day, most Palo Altans are not focused on what others are charging. So still, I think this is going to become as a bit of a shock. And I agree with you. I wish we had built this up over a longer period of time, rather than this, I don't want to say it's a dramatic increase, but a significant one over the next few years. So is the goal for wastewater revenues to really just kind of have normal profit, and do these rate increases allow us to be able to achieve that goal? And again, are we just trying to cover the costs?
This is covering the costs of the treatment costs and the the collection system costs.
Yep, and that's council prior policy.
And to make sure the reserves remain within the guideline range.
Okay, perfect. So the same as our water utility.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And profit isn't quite the right word for this context, right? Because we're not allowed to make money on above our reasonable expenses and projected capital needs, is if I'm understanding that correctly.
So that's why I meant normal profit to just cover those costs.
Okay.
Thank you.
So one thing I want to touch on is the projection on slide number 6, the projection that we have on revenue as a result of that we charge on per gallon, that, and just so everybody, my colleagues and everybody understands, this is the water that goes down our sanitary sewer. So it's our toilets, our showers, our dishwashers, our washing machines. That's pretty much it. It's not our water use per se in our outdoor gardening and all that, which is our highest water use, certainly in the summer months. In the winter months, it's primarily the interior water use. But in a drought, we shower shorter, we flush less, we conserve water indoors. And so as we emerge from the drought, the projection on how much revenue we will get from water use and water that we have to treat actually goes up. And we don't seem to be, or maybe we're projecting that a little bit. We've got a modest increase. So we're assuming a return to normal water use in the wastewater collection volume?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the non-residential revenue for sewer. The residential charge is a monthly service charge.
It's a fixed amount.
Yeah,
volumetric.
about $45
I
currently.
forgot that.
And but for the non-residential, exactly, the restaurants are charged based on the previous month of usage, water usage as a proxy, and the commercial are charged based on the winter usage, water usage.
And that's right, because we don't meter it. We're a flat rate for residential.
Yes, and so what happened was during the years impacted by the COVID policies, pandemic policies, that non-residential revenue did decline, I think about 11%. And it has started coming back, particularly on the restaurant side, and is also coming back on the commercial side, but is not quite yet back to pre-pandemic levels. And we are including that in the projections.
Got it. Okay. And then when we're looking at deterioration of our collection system, these pipes, we had great video and photos in recent years, or perhaps it's decades. We've had better ability to monitor actual conditions, right? Can you refresh me on to what extent we actually look at main sewer lines and their condition, and that we have information and when did we start getting better information from that monitoring of video cameras than we used to?
Yeah, we have an entire crew dedicated to just being able to see CCTV cameras and flush and do maintenance. So that's part of our regular protocol. And in fact, as part of our design, when we're trying to pick and select pipes for the next round, we'll rely on that information to help prioritize. And on one of our upcoming, the one in fact that was discussed earlier that we're sort of accelerating to get ahead of Caltrans, as we were going through some of the prioritization, we actually had our operations crews go out there and collect more data to sort of further inform the prioritization. Prices were coming in high. We were trying to figure out, were there certain segments that we could maybe wait 5 years or do that kind of thing. So a lot of the immediate prioritization is based around that really hard data of we're looking at it, we're collecting these videos and sort of analyzing them. The long term, we don't really know how it's going to degrade over time, so we're doing the planning level estimate.
That was kind of what I was trying to get a feel for, is to what extent are we able to use this monitoring data to really know our next several years plan versus the longer term, we have to have just a generalized projection.
Yeah, that's exactly the approach. We sort of will do more discrete prioritization. If we sort of also identify any actual failures that might move certain pipe segments differently along the list, or if our crews are out there and something that was in a future planned future year, we all of a sudden through video footage identify that there is a more significant issue, then we might accelerate that. So we're constantly balancing that. I won't say we get every foot of main every year by any stretch of the imagination, but we do try to make that as available as possible to prioritize.
So putting aside for the moment the long-term pace of going from 1 mile a year to 2.5 miles a year, based on this monitoring data that we actually do have, how many miles a year do you think we need to do over the next 1, 3, and 5 years? Do you have a sense of that?
No. Well, I have a sense, but I don't know I can give you a hard number.
Okay,
I think
take
that the sense of it is that it's going to take us a little bit of time to ramp up to be able to produce that kind of a design, a little bit of time. So it's a couple of years, backing up a second. We will design 1 year, build the other on pretty much each of the utilities. So it's going to take us a couple of years to then really make sure that we do a thorough job of identifying and picking the next grouping of high priority pipes. And then what's left over gets sort of kicked to the next grouping, and then we'll reevaluate at that point in time. So we would probably, as we finish up in the next year, what we call SSR for sanitary sewer replacement 31, the 31st project. As we finish up SSR 31, we would then move into design. Obviously SSR 31, which was just bid, we know which pipes are in there. Once that's getting near the end of construction, we'd be looking at then identifying, based on the data that we have, the best available data that we have, what the next high priority grouping of pipes would be. If that answers your question.
It helps. So then when we look at on slide 2, the alternatives that we're considering, we're front loaded on years 24 and 25, and actually based on the recommendation, it's even through 26 and 27 before it starts dropping to 5% increase. And the other alternatives are either less front loaded or a shorter period of time that's front loaded. So we've got pretty good visibility. You're in design phase right now for the things you're going to do in 24 and 25. If we were to select alternative B, would you be able to implement what you can now see you need to do in actual 24, 25, maybe even 26 pipes? And then we make that next adjustment and review that a year or 2 years from now and look at what rate increase we need at that time, knowing that eventually we've got to get up to this 2.5 miles a year. But jumping from 1 mile a year to 2.5 miles a year, it results in a significant rate increase at this point in time when we have a lot of increases going on and a big community sensitivity to overall utility rates because of these electric and gas spikes primarily.
And if I understood correctly, I might try to answer your question slightly differently, which is to say that we would, I believe, be able to determine what the next grouping of pipes would be. However, the last column in that table, alternative B, the next project, we wouldn't be at the 2.5 miles until 2034. So then at that rate, the last asset is going to be that much older on the backside. It's no longer going to be 108 years old. It's going to be, I'm bad at mental math, but it'll be 108 plus.
But what if B was something a little different? If it was 7%, 7%, 6, 6, and 6, then that brings us in to somewhere between the 2028 and the 2034 to get to the 2.5 miles a year, right?
Yes, I can see the math. At the end of the day, I think it's a little bit fluid in the sense of how much money are we collecting each year into the reserves and into the budget to be able to. But effectively, it's a matter of we can either the front loaded on the rates certainly starts the revenue collection process and allows us to accelerate the start date, and that's why the 3 9s allow us the most sort of, I would say, aggressive start date. But even at the start of 2026, we're still at 108 years for the last pipe. That's the last pipe being replaced out of this go round.
But 7 and 7, if alternative B would allow us to keep pace on what we're already designing as needing to be done in 2024, 25, perhaps 26. That's kind of the foresight that you have based upon specific pipe analysis that you've done. And then beyond that, you start moving into a longer term projection, which is we don't know exactly what we need to do in years 27 and 28, but we're trying to move into that longer term need at that point in time. And so what I'm really inclined toward right now is a version of B, which would be 7% and 7% the next 2 years, and then anticipate 6% increases thereafter, with an understanding that as this committee and council look at this next year and the following year, we could decide to up that rate of replacement even further and basically get into that 2.5 mile a year pace sooner than the modified B would do. And I'm not hearing that if we went to B, that we would have any negative impact on the next couple of years' replacement rates, but that we would need to ultimately bite that bullet in the coming years, either upping it to the 6% in 2026 and thereafter, or through some other approach. But we also should recognize that, so say we did that, we did a modified B, 7%, 7%, and then 6% thereafter. It looks to me like that's about 2031, we'd get to the 2.5 mile a year replacement rate. And that would mean that we are nevertheless going from 1 mile a year to 2.5 miles a year. That's a big increase to what we should have been doing all along. It's a big step. And I think about times where we as a council looked at how did we adjust our underfunded pension liabilities. And we didn't bite that all off at once. We did it in chunks. And too abrupt of a change was too hard of a hit on the budget. But we got there. And we're ahead of almost every other community in terms of what we're investing in the unfunded pension liabilities. And I'm thinking along the same lines here. In this year, to take the alternative B, but to modify it with years 26 onward, anticipating the 6%, just not this year and next year going to the 9%.
Right. And if I might, and certainly it's the council's prerogative to set rates as the policymaker. So there's nothing in what I'm saying that is intended to go against that. I would just point out that at that point, if we're going to hold to the same target useful life, we're not going to be doing 2.5 miles a year anymore. We're going to be talking a higher rate increase. So then if we're going to extend it now beyond that much farther beyond the end of its useful life, instead of 8%, we're now at 13, 15, 20% beyond, and we're borrowing into the bad years, if you will. So that's the risk is going down into the future, albeit when none of us are going to be working and probably alive, but that's a separate matter.
And if we compare what even that would be to what we've done for the last 50 years, it is a big improvement.
And then just to finish up, the second thing I was going to say is that 9%, I know it's daunting from a percentage standpoint, but
It's less than $1 a month.
It's $4 a month is I think if I'm on the right slide 9, it is only $4 a month. And I'm not trying to, only is probably not the right term. It is $4 a month. But those are the two things that I just wanted to point out.
Well, if you're going to take it out of Lisa's increase, I'm okay. But the problem is they are cumulative, and this is what the concern is.
Right, understood.
But the $4 a month, that's the increase. To do any of this is a $4. The recommended is a $4 a month.
Correct.
The difference between recommended and alternative B is 80 cents a month, or 90 cents a month, I mean. So we're talking about saving 90 cents a month by going from the recommended to alternative B. which I agree with you, Pat, on the don't bite it all off right now, but I'm kind of in this, my mindset on this is it seems like prior folks have already kicked this can to us. And I'm more inclined to say, you know what, this is our reality. The monthly increase is relatively minor in terms of the differences between alternative B and the recommendation. And I'm really worried about what's going to happen if we end up in this 108, 114 and beyond year maintenance plan for the final bits of the main. So that's why I'm inclined to go with the recommendation. I do have a question for you, Dean. And forgive me, this is probably not the kind of conversation we normally have in the finance committee, but this is the way I think. And so I'd like to try to understand it visually. When the narrative talked about how Caltrans is supposedly going to do El Camino next year, which is awesome, I all of a sudden pictured like, okay, they open up the road, whether it's El Camino or University Avenue or what have you. We've got all these lines. We've got water, we've got wastewater, we've got gas, we've got electric if it's underground. Maybe we get some fiber in there. What is among senior leadership? Is there a big map somewhere like, oh, hey, we're planning on doing this to this main for the waste treatment. Oh, hey, we over here on the water side are planning to do that 10 years later. Oh, hey, we here are
Yeah, so we've
contemplating
got-
fiber, are planning, like, is there a big map somewhere where senior leadership talks about this and makes sure that we are achieving efficiencies, certainly not having redundancies, or God forbid, you just dug that up, we just repaved that.
Yeah, there is. Down in the engineering group, there's actually 3 separate maps of the city. And we do look at where we can get some synergies around some of the projects that might be coming up. And, maybe the gas main is not going to be replaced for another 4 years. Well, we're not going to be able to tear up El Camino in 4 years as we just replaced this sewer main. And then we also work with Public Works as well when they're going to repave a street. Same idea is that, we don't want to go back in there within the moratorium of 5-year period of time to rip up another street because now the residents are going to be, not too kindly to the utility side. The worst thing about it is that the water, gas, and wastewater is not used as a joint trench. So they're at different levels and they're different spaces. So you might have wastewater that's going to be a little bit deeper because it's gravity flow, or the water and gas are pressurized. So they're not going to be as deep into the ground levels, but we do keep them separated because of that. Now on the electric side, we can put fiber and we can put electric in the same trench lines. We actually even put telephone in there when AT&T wants to come with us or Comcast wants to come with us, and they're on the opposite side of the streets. So we try not to put the street in jeopardy with all the utilities and jam pack them all on one side. And like I said, they are, and there is maps, and engineering does look at what's the long feasibility. I mean, a couple, maybe about this age in 3 years ago, we tore up University. And so we had a water main that was in there and we wanted to put some fiber in there. And so we replaced the water main at the same time. Water main, I think it was water main. Anyway, we replaced the utility at the same time that we added 2,700 feet of fiber conduit in there. And it was about time. It was about 3 or 4 more years and we were gonna have to go in there anyway. So we do look at that opportunity every time we can build.
And I'll just add, well, 2 things that I think we do a better job of that than we used to. And this example that Dean just cited of University, we actually held off on that water main initially that was driving it because we wanted to relook at doing this as a set. And we said, wait a minute, don't proceed on this major need, even though it was scheduled. And so there is, I think, a better integrated planning of that, along with the timing of simply street repair than we formerly did.
Are we ever in a circumstance where we're like, holy moly, we're here now with the asphalt taken up, we're in the trench, and we can see that there's a synergy we did not appreciate? Do we ever need to make a decision on the fly, or relatively speaking that cannot wait for it to go through the Utilities Commission and then council? Do we ever find ourselves having to make emergency decisions that sort of circumvent traditional timeline for policymakers.
So I think the only time that ever happens is if there's an emergency situation where we've torn up the street and we see some degradation of whatever that service may be, or that main, our in-house crews will have to do that small fix, because when the contractor, of course, you bid out this job, it's going to be a sewer. It's really hard for them to jump over and start doing a water. They may not even be qualified to do the water portion of it. So then we have to go back through the whole process if we have to replace large sections of a main or a large project where you get into the mile portion. But maybe it's a quarter mile, because you see and you open it up. Yes, then our in-house crews, Matt's crews, then would be able to go in there and make those repairs and extend that main piece that's bad.
And I wanted to speak to Julie, kind of your point on, well, one from a long-term management of the investments in capital needs of these various utilities and other costs that may not be capital. We can look at these individual rate increases and we say, well, they're not so bad. But what we really are also facing is right now, we have an acute focus in our community by residents and businesses on these spikes in rates. And those spikes, when we look at the importance of our climate plan, the willingness of the community to embrace the financial investments needed to address our climate plan are tied to how they perceive these other rate increases. And we can say, gee, that's a small amount, or gee, it's really important to do this long term, and we undermine the community's support for something that is extremely important. And that's what I'm trying to balance. And that's why I'm willing to look at how do we mitigate without jeopardizing some of these increases, even if we can't radically change them. And I think that's extremely important, and it's not addressed specifically here because it's not what's right in front of us, but our community looks at these things in that broader context at some intuitive level, maybe more than specific analytical level on a given increase. And I'm very concerned about that.
I'm inclined to defer to you on that because of who you are and how long you've been at this. I seriously am. Okay, I appreciate that. You're saying that it makes me want to go back to the one we just approved because, this particular increase seems to be so small that I can't see consumers saying that. But I absolutely get that your read on this is probably far more accurate than I'm even capable of, given how many years you've been at this.
Well, thanks. And what's on our horizon, the importance of having the community support for what we believe in. And maybe the prior one would have been more dollars, but we have to look at each one in terms of, is there really something that we could do that would not be any significantly detrimental and still gives us the ability to make the long-term investments at the right point in time, but to mitigate these this year's significant increases on top of these unanticipated spikes that we're all contending with.
Can somebody remind me what percentage of the overall utility bill goes to water versus wastewater?
Yeah, let's go back to that slide. I don't have it in this deck. It's a really good question. I don't think I have that number off the top of my head, but we have it in that green table. I just need to pull that up.
And I'll just say that we've got, including in 2 weeks, these even bigger categories of gas and electric. And so water's high, wastewater's not a lot. but water, gas and electric.
So
are the
that's
big
why I
ones.
don't want us to ding wastewater when it really isn't the problem. I'm kind of inclined to say if the bigger things that are coming in 2 weeks are actually speaking to what people are currently really up in arms about to start with, then maybe we want to be much more fiscally conservative and have a longer term plan in 2 weeks on gas and electric, but let wastewater
My
proceed with the
inclination is to
recommendation.
look at where we can mitigate a big increase in a reasonable way. And I don't disagree that those are the bigger numbers. Water is a big number too. But I'm just inclined to mitigate it where we can and go about it that way. And yeah, so that's kind of my guiding principle on this.
So Chair Bird, if I could just add one thing, as you heard from Lisa, especially with this going around this project 31 that's on El Camino, the bids came in around $2 million larger than what we had budgeted for. We're asking, to borrow those dollars in the future years. With your plan of asking for the 7% in that next year, there's a strong possibility that there will not be a CIP in that, because 7% brings only in about $500,000, because as we know, wastewater is a very low amount in the capital aspects of it. And so the concern maybe is that as we continue, and if we have to do more on the maintenance side, it won't be capitalized, of course, but the maintenance costs will go up as we go, because we are not going to be able to get to even the 1 mile portion of it in the coming next year, because we're borrowing those dollars now. We do need to get those dollars out for the future for right now.
So when we were presented these different alternatives, are you saying that, one of the alternatives is alternative C, and it sounds like what you're saying, if we even considered alternative C, that would have a very significant impact on necessary capital replacements.
I just want to add that the costs for the pending, as Matt mentioned, there's a pending sewer replacement. So even after we finalize this report, there's been changes in the budget going up as that has just gone out to bid. So we did our best to present proposals. I think that there may be impacts on that near-term project, the SSR 31, from lowering the increase beyond what we expected in the alternatives that we presented. But we would be happy to develop that alternative that you described earlier.
Okay, so I don't want to do something that is going to have a detrimental impact on project that we need to do in the near to medium term. Maybe on this one, I would suggest that we roll over this item to our meeting on the 21st so that you can provide that supplemental info and we can make a more informed decision if that's okay. I agree.
I'm fine. I'm fine with that. I'd also like, on the 21st and just in the future, if staff has a recommendation, and especially if the UAC is supporting it as well, to have a real defense of that recommendation. I think our conversations are important and helpful, and I'm kind of been on the fence, and I think this has been a good discussion. I just haven't been hearing much from staff as far as why this recommendation is the best option and why these alternatives are not the preferred ones. So fine with delaying this conversation to the 21st to be able to get the chair's alternative out there as well.
If I can just offer, kind of take this back to the framing of this. Staff's put forward a recommendation. It's, as Matt said, not based on hard science, and that it is certainly council's prerogative to do something less aggressive. And that's a matter of weighing council's acceptance of risk. And so staff's recommendation is based on what we think the best available industry science out there is, and you know, a fairly risk averse stance from staff standpoint that sewer overflows and pipes breaking are a bad thing. And we don't want the city to get into that situation, but that's not to say that at year 105 that, you know, we're going to have a bunch of problems on the next day. So staff's recommendation is based on that. And if council wants to accept more risk around the system, then there are alternatives that can accommodate that.
When I think more discussion, Dean, I think what you were going there was helpful. Kind of saying, if we delay this more, at least this is how I was interpreting it. If we delay this more, we risk more kind of minor breaks that may require some minor repairs, which requires more funding, which delays us then further on actual replacement. And do we see ourselves in a far worse position if we wait several years rather than kind of just sucking it up now and paying the cost and doing the infrastructure improvement? So I think all that would be really helpful, because I have no clue about wastewater and pipe replacements and all of that. So I'm deferring to the experts here. So that, I thought what you were saying was helpful.
Well, and so I'm going to move that we continue this item to the 22nd. But you know, we're looking at a significant and necessary increase in our investment in this replacement schedule. It's a question of how much we suck it up in the year with a big bump, and where we have our ratepayers who are up in arms about increases that we couldn't control. And how do we balance those issues? And that's what I'm struggling with. All right, so I'll move that we continue it to the 21st, if there's a second.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Okay, good. And I'll just say, these have been really healthy discussions and informative for us. So, okay, now we move on to the storm and surface water drainage item number 3.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Burt.
Do I have it
If
wrong?
we could just have a really clear direction on what you want to see us come back with on the 21st.
Yeah, it would be, what would be the implications on replacements on the horizon, whatever our current visibility is, 2 years or so, of adopting alternative A or a modified version of alternative B, as I suggested, that might go to the 7% and 7%, but then in 26 through 28 up it to 6%.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll take just a moment, pause, let people our next is storm and surface water
You keep saying surf water. It makes me
think of,
California surfer days.
drainage. Karen, welcome.
My name's Karen North. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works. And this is fairly simple item. It's our stormwater management fee increase. That was basically, we're just following up with the voters, what they approved in 2017. It's a CPI increase, so we can go to the next one. Oh, thanks, Vinny. You already did that. So our fee is back in 2017, when the voters approved, about 55% goes to ongoing stormwater management programs. That one does not sunset. So that's litter, water pollution prevention controls, our engineering staff, and storm drain maintenance and emergency response, which they've been very busy this season, as you can imagine. And we're prepping for the next storm on Thursday. And then the other 45% that does sunset June 1st of 2032, and that's for projects and infrastructure component. And so we have the voters approved 13 approved projects. So we're slowly gunning through those: storm system replacement and rehabilitation, and then green storm and infrastructure and innovative programs, and a debt service for past capital projects. And those payment ends in fiscal year 24. We also have a stormwater oversight committee, and I'm the staff liaison for that as well. So this is a little hard to see, but it just kind of gives you an idea of the 13 projects that were in the voter. I know, sorry, I apologize. Just so you know, the items in red is done, and the items in green are currently in design. And then the black ones are areas that are prioritized for future. And this is also on our city website on the storm, where you update it fairly regularly based on the project for the storm drain team. And then the next slide is what we are hoping for the 24 proposed rate increase. It's a 4.9% increase. It's alignment with the CPI. And so it's a 0.78. So we're going from 15.98 for equivalent residential unit to 16.76. And we're going to increase our budget by around 400,000. So I'm here to answer any questions.
First, I realized I was remiss on the previous two items because I didn't confirm with Ben that we had no public speakers. And I'm confident he would have flagged me if we had, but I should have checked on that.
Yeah, just for the record, we had no members of the public online or in person.
Thank you. Okay, we're good. Saved by the bell. And we're now in the last two items that are going to be the easy part. How do you get the good straw?
I don't know. I was here for wastewater too, because I
That's
oversee the treatment plant, but yes, this is an easy one.
Okay.
Can I just ask why we are even discussing it, since it seems that we had a ballot initiative and it said it's the difference in the CPI or 6%, the lesser of the two? Why are we here?
I totally agree. I've been doing this for 3 or 4 years, and every year I say the same thing, but I think it's just so for the public to understand what they've done, and so they understand the rates and what we did in 2017. It's just for transparency. But yes, I'm right there with you.
Well, it's also
Thanks,
to
Heather.
answer, no problem, to answer your question, council member. The other piece of it is when voters approve rates, whether it be a rate like this or a tax, what they're approving typically in more modern ballot language or ordinances are maximums. So rates can go up to a maximum of, but in most modern ordinances, agencies include a clause that reserves the right for council on any year to do something lower than what the voters have approved. And so on something like this, where the rate is variable based on the CPI, it is brought to council every year for your consideration and approval of what that adjustment would be, because technically you do have the ability to choose something lower. Same thing actually goes for what the council and the voters just approved for the natural gas utility transfer, which we'll talk more about actually on the 21st of March, where, if you watched the UAC last week, you'll see that there's a recommendation to transfer less than what the voters had approved. And same thing for actually the new business tax that was just approved. Again, the rates are approved by the voters, but council does have the authority to choose something lower. Mm-hmm.
And there's another part to this, which is the actual projects. as opposed to just the dollar amounts. And I wanted to ask on that, just for others' information, in the previous ballot measure that we had prior to this one, at the end of that measure, we had a remaining district of Southgate, and we didn't have enough dollars to do a full traditional stormwater system. And we instead experimented with a green stormwater drainage system, which many of us have seen, and it was a hit. It worked well, and the community, that neighborhood, valued it. And it was ecologically better because it meant that we were essentially percolating that water rather than having it compete for capacity in the creek during a flood period. And it refilled the water table at the same time. And as a result, my recollection is that in this ballot measure, we said that would, I don't know if we called it our default, but it became a preferred design alternative where it would work. So Karin, can you give us more context on that aspect and how it fits with this set of projects?
Sure. So the green stormwater infrastructure is actually more for the small kind of urban drool, smaller storms. It doesn't actually handle anything larger. Our current storm drain system is actually designed for the 10-year storm. So even when we had that massive event, our storm drain system actually performed pretty well because it is really only designed for the 10-year storm. But we are trying to figure out other ways of incorporating green stormwater infrastructure, which slows the flow of water and also helps treat it. So then it's a higher quality water going into the storm drain system, since that is not treated water. And Southgate is a great example of it. If you haven't been by there, we've actually been refurbishing and rehabilitating those because we realized that they were kind of orphans and not taken care of. And so we're finding neighbors to basically take care of them and nurture them and bring them back to good health, which is nice. And then also within our municipal regional stormwater permit, which is a requirement from the state, we have to actually treat a certain amount of water through green stormwater infrastructure. So the next 5-year permit cycle, we need to basically treat for the equivalent of 4 acres of watershed needs to go through green stormwater infrastructure. So that's part of where this funding goes, is to identify and then build and then rehabilitate and maintain the green stormwater infrastructure.
Did you just use a term of art, urban drool?
We have lots of different terms of art, yes, but urban drool is something that now people are looking at as a value because it is the constant landscape water irrigation, the constant just water that goes off of people's properties. And then we need to figure out how to treat it. And then usually those are the ones that pick up all the contaminants.
And who won the prize for that term of art?
I think that was some other stormwater manager that figures out how do we take that and utilize it as a resource, right? But
yeah, it should have been run through the marketing department.
Yes, I apologize for my slang on urban drool.
And I'll just add one other note, as Karin was talking about the need to treat stormwater. There's both the mandate, and then there's what are the technologies and how effectively can we do that? And what are the sorts of things that are running off from our streets that are actually pollutants, whether they're heavy metals, primarily copper, or organic pollutants, including from our tires that just disappear on us. And studies in the last couple of years up in Washington have shown that tire particulate is one of the principal drivers for salmon die-offs. And more 20 plus years ago, now more than that, more than 25 years ago, our wastewater utility, in collaboration with Stanford, had just a breakthrough analysis that discovered where the unaccounted for copper that was going into the bay was coming from. And it was the brake pads in automobiles that are copper laden to basically reduce the squeaking. And that had national, if not international, implications on redesigning copper brake pads to minimize that content, because basically there was more copper in many circumstances than was needed. And that all ties into kind of these comprehensive approaches. I wanted to mention that because on the horizon, there may be another technology advancement that we may be in the middle of a synergy on. So the numbers are having preliminary discussions about with our carbon neutral goal. That means that we need to look at not only carbon reductions, but any ways that we can capture carbon. And the Peninsula Clean Water, is that what they call it, in San Mateo County's wastewater treatment system directly to the north, has been piloting a process that's called pyrolysis for their wastewater treatment sludge, the solids that we get after we remove those contaminants from the wastewater. So that's not this, that's when that prior discussion, what goes down actually the sanitary pipes as opposed to the stormwater pipes. That technology, pyrolysis, means you cook this materials at high temperature in the absence of oxygen. It's not burning it. There's no CO2 released, and it basically turns that material into a form of charcoal. And that charcoal is called biochar. And one of the uses of biochar, it's similar to what we have in industry of activated carbon, which we actually even use in our wastewater treatment plant for more airborne contaminants. Is that right?
No, it's used in our dual media filters.
Okay. Caltrans did a study in the last 2 years on utilizing this biochar for highway runoff filtration, and very promising results, which is not surprising to me because I use these materials in industry for 30 years, and there are different variations of activating carbon or not, but it's a great material for that purpose. It's also an agricultural amenity. But we may in the future have a technology where we, instead of sending our sludge off site to be dried, we may treat it in Palo Alto and create a very valuable product that we may use here or at the wastewater treatment plant. Those things are yet to be fully determined, but there's a great deal of advancements in this treatment of biosludge. Frankly, in this field of pyrolysis and biochar, this had been one of the holy grails of, gee, could we ever treat biosludge this way? The problem is it had too high a water content, but the process itself has a lot of waste heat, and the next generation of technologies have captured the heat to move it back into pre-drying the sludge so that then you can cook it and make biochar. So that's a long introduction, but I wanted to start wetting our whistles on this. It goes into us having kind of a synergy of approaches between the green stormwater approach, what we're next generation of wastewater treatment technologies, and kind of having a closed system on that. And I should add that when you turn in that charcoal, that process produces a biogas that we can use to produce electricity. And if we go into fuel cells, non-carbon emitting electricity. But the char captures that carbon for hundreds of years potentially. And so it's viewed as a carbon negative process that then we use that material for advantageous purposes like this. So this kind of drifts into our broader SCAP discussions, but it's how these efforts on the horizon may integrate with that. And I'm not going to say more. I just had to share that one.
I feel like I just went to grad school for about
Yeah.
2 minutes.
All right. On that note, I will move the staff recommendation on rate increases.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. All righty. And now we move on to maybe an even easier one. Thank you.
So I did not put together a presentation on this. It is. So I think a lot of you already know about this, but the Electric Line Construction Division is currently with insignificant resources to meet the daily demands that we have. We brought this contract to the finance group just because of the large dollar amount. It's a $20 million contract over a 5-year period of time. It is a larger contract than what we had with Hotline. We did put out, we advertised about 1,400 mailers went out to different contractors about this work. We only got 3 bidders to come back. It was between $4.2 and $4.6 million. Hotline was just over that $4.2 million mark. We would have liked it per year. We would have loved to keep them, but this is a brand new company to us, VIP. And they will be basically doing the same work that we have, as I don't think I really need to talk about this, but, we have insignificant lineman positions. Right now, we only have 5 line people out of 20 authorized positions. 5 of them are fully a line person, and we have 3 apprentices going into their 2nd year or their 4th year program. So we are pretty significantly challenged on a daily basis. So we really truly need this contractor to really help us and basically do our maintenance work, as well as getting ready for some electrification work that we're going to be doing. And then also the one big thing on this is that's in this contract is emergency services. So as you know, when we had these outages this past with the heavy winds that we had, we started seeing outages around Monday about 2:00 in the afternoon. We were able to get our last customers back up at 3:00 on Tuesday morning, and our contractor worked side by side with our crews that we had. So we rely on them very much. So this contract's very important to us. It is a larger contract than what we had with Hotline. It was a 3-year contract with a total amount of $4.5 million, but we did come back to council and ask for an amendment on this for an additional $6.8 million of all the work that actually needed to be done. So we think that this is a much better deal, and we think that going to a 5-year deal gets us some cost reductions that typically that we would not see if we were getting into a shorter contract. So we're asking the finance group to basically adopt the termination of this action to expect the environmental rules under Class 1, which is existing facilities, or CEQA, and then approve the authorization for the city manager to execute the contract for the $20 million over a 5-year period of time, not to exceed $4 million at any given year during that period of time. So that was a recommendation to the finance group. Again, reason why we wanted to bring it was just the large amount of monies and not just putting it on consent for everybody to wonder why we need $20 million from a utility standpoint. So with that, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, thanks. So first, it is a big contract. How familiar are you with VIP power line? And we're moving, it's a big contract with a new provider.
We are not very familiar with VIP. We have done some research on them. They seem to be a smaller company than Hotline is. They are and have folks that are qualified. If you notice into the contract portions of it, we put some heavy language in there about termination for not fulfilling the needs. We also put in there that they need to respond in an emergency standpoint within 2 hours. And if they can't fill those needs, then, we're going to have to look at the contract and let these folks go. But right now, I wish I could tell you that I know them and they're doing great work. But from everybody that we did, we checked on 6 sources. And then, and
6 references.
6 references. They gave us 3, but what we found out that we knew a couple other folks that have actually used them and are using them. They're mostly a mid to back east company. There's not too much on the West Coast. They're kind of expanding out to this way. So, we'll see what we get.
Well, and the most valuable references are typically the ones they don't give you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the a couple things here. One is that appreciate this coming to the committee, and just to make sure everybody knows that typically a unanimous referral from a standing committee goes on consent, except we have in our procedures that it could go on to an action item just by virtue of the size rather than whether it's contentious or not. And because of that size, this is a $20 million contract, I would recommend we go ahead and put it on action, even if we anticipate very limited discussion at the council. Approving a $20 million contract without the council having that opportunity, I think it falsely implies a lack of scrutiny of the council over major expenditures. And so I would recommend that we do that.
So, Chair, I understand your perspective, and you are absolutely correct that we at times choose to put items from the committees onto action for a broader council discussion. I will note that your action calendars are rather full. So although this may be something that we think can move quickly, at this point, I believe your tentative agendas are full until April. So I would need to ask Director Batchelor on the impact of something like this in terms of that time frame. The other thing I would say is part of why staff brought this to the committee actually was to alleviate the need to put
I
such a large.
appreciate that.
No,
Yeah.
understood. So I just want to state for the committee and for the public, that's part of why we did bring this, to try and expedite that, to manage the council's calendar. So again, it is at the committee's discretion if you wish to recommend as part of your motion, despite it being a unanimous vote, that you would still prefer this item to be on the action calendar. But just wanted to provide that additional context. And like I said, I would also need to check in with the director on timing.
So Dean, would there be any implications if it didn't hit the council until April?
I should know that, but I don't know that. I think that when we did the last amendment, as it is in the report portion of it, it's through February of 23 of this year. But I don't remember if we did time extension on the amendment. I want to say that there's an amendment until May to keep hotline in place.
Okay, so if we have a motion that recommends it go on action, provided that it would not have an impact on operations to do so, then I'd be good with that.
I'm kind of feeling the opposite, which is that given that we have 5 journey linemen out of 20 in place, we're desperate for outside contractors. This work is critical. People are frustrated that the lines are going down and they're not, fixed more quickly. I would rather see us put this on consent with adequate explanation as to why it warranted.
But what Dean said is he believes that the current contract would continue through May and we wouldn't have any impact. And if we would have an impact, I'm with you. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I'm with Assistant City Manager Nozeon here. I mean, I think April is the earliest that we can get this agendized, and just going off of practice that we've seen so far this year, no matter how brief we may think an item may be, I think the minimum we've seen is an hour on any true action item, and even that is pretty I think would be a very fast action item for this council. I highlight the idea we're having a chance to vet it here tonight. There will always be the option to be able to pull it, and if we do get it pulled, council might be able to express interest in expediting that based on Dean's thoughts on May. So I'm fine with this continuing with consent. I mean, it's definitely been a struggle to try to manage the agendas, especially like through pre-council, especially just given how long it has taken us to get through agendas.
So speaking as somebody who's gone through a lot of agenda management over the years, I think you're leaving out weed abatement and those sorts of perfunctory things.
Well, yeah, that's
And
was
I
the
would put
exception.
this in nearly that category. I don't anticipate that this would take an hour. And I'd be willing to put money on that, and I might be proven wrong. But I'll take the bet. Now I will say that, and I'd be disinclined to do this, but a vote to not support that by one of the members of this committee means that it would necessarily go on agenda. So what I'd like to do is have us recommend it that it would go on agenda, provided there would be no significant impacts on operations. And that still gives discretion in the agenda planning process. It's a recommendation and a contingent recommendation.
I'd accept that because given the alternative, it's going to go on action anyways. So
Okay.
I begrudgingly support that.
We can't persuade you.
I think it's appropriate for a $20 million contract to try to go on the action, even if it's an abbreviated discussion. I think it's when we look at our roles and the importance of public trust in what we're doing, this is part of it. And it gets inconvenient sometimes, but that's the balance. And if we erode that public trust, it comes back and bites us. So that's my reason, not because I think that we have to discuss it and that I think it's contentious, but for the reasons I stated. And I do want to just add one other note, which is FYI for, as Dean mentioned, this trying to hire internally or find available contractors with high voltage line workers is a real challenge. And that is why this was one of the referrals last year of the SCAP ad hoc, which is to pursue legislation to try to address this need and that of power supply engineers, the engineers above this level. And I've been working for 6 months with primarily Assembly Member Berman's staff and secondarily Senator Becker's staff to try to get actually legislation through that will begin to feed this pipeline, because this is a shortage that not only are we facing right now and the industry facing, but as everybody is moving toward electrification, this problem will be compounded and quickly. And it has been, in my mind, the most overlooked choke point and constraint in all the climate goals that we're looking at. If we don't have these people, good luck implementing our plan.
Well, I'll see you and raise you. I want to see us encouraging more Palo Alto kids to pursue trades. And if we could come up with a city program that incentivizes kids to become an apprentice, whatever that would be amazing. We need more paths out of Palo Alto, and this is one obvious one.
Well, and a big part of the discussion is it's not only Palo Alto, but we look at more modest income communities. These are incredibly
jobs.
And so I was shocked to understand that the power, the high voltage line workers who are not even actually needing an AA degree to do this, make more money than the power supply engineers, 4-year degreed engineers, and with overtime considerably more. These jobs are for journeymen, in the range of $200,000 to $250,000 a year
Yeah,
for demanding
yeah,
skilled work, but that does not require true higher education.
Yeah.
It is a phenomenal opportunity, and part of the problem is been a marketing issue. And that's part of what we're attempting to address is to build an awareness of what great career opportunities are in these positions. Okay, so my motion is that we recommend this go on agenda, provided that there are no impacts on operations to do so.
Chair Burt, a member of the public did recently join the meeting
Oh,
on
great.
Zoom. Do you want to
Okay.
ask for public comments?
That would be fine.
Okay, let's see if this person wants to raise.
Your motion include a recommendation from finance that we.
Yes, and approving. Sorry.
Chair, no request to speak.
Okay. Sorry, and clarify my motion is a recommendation that we approve this with those other contingencies. Yes, Dean?
Oh, no, go ahead and take your vote.
No, we're
Oh. Just a procedure. So how do I get back to you, to the three of you?
you will
do I
just,
send
it
you an
won't be to
email?
us, it will be through the city manager
then-
and to the mayor and vice mayor
Where-
who do the
Your
agenda
first-
setting.
No, I'm talking about if it has, oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah,
You're right.
you would
Got it.
inform them
Yes,
it's no problem or it's a problem.
right, got it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay,
And
Yeah.
Vin, did you catch that motion or did you want some help with it?
Is it the staff recommendation with the caveat that this recommendation go to council as an action item? Provided that it does not impact operations?
nailed it.
Nailed it.
And
Good job.
if it does, it would go on consent.
If it has any operational implications, it would go to consent.
Got it.
All right, all in favor?
Did we get a second? Sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, sure. Second.
okay. All good? All in
Yeah.
favor? Aye. Okay, and that concludes our items for tonight. Do we want to briefly review upcoming agenda?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So we do obviously, as you discussed tonight, have a full agenda coming up on this March 21st, our next meeting. So in 2 weeks from now, Tuesday, the 21st, we will be going over the gas and electric utilities. We also have a contract that's in the works, another utilities contract, one of our commodity purchase contracts. And then now the wastewater rates will carry forward so that the committee can review all three in full. Following that, we have a bit of a reprieve since we brought the utility rates so early. And what the committee is going to see is actually an email, if not already out, soon to be out from the clerk, polling on dates for May, actually, since we've been working offline with the committee members, trying to figure out potential dates based on schedules. So we'll send out a narrowed poll to see your availability for those budget discussions in May. Again, those are typically about 2.5 days worth of meetings, depending on how lengthy the committee's discussion is, or how compact it may be. So check your emails for those as they will be coming out from Vin, but otherwise we will see you in 2 weeks.
And the first budget meetings of the finance committee are not the first week of May, I take it.
So right now, looking at folks' calendars, the budgets are expected to be going to council on May 1st.
When you say folks' calendars,
Well, you had asked me to coordinate with some of the committee members since there were known scheduling due to
right,
personal commitments.
I just don't recall coordinating with me.
I have not.
Okay.
That's why we haven't, I have only gotten to some of them, not you. And so if we wanted to do daytime meetings, then the 5th is actually a odd but potentially viable option, which is a Friday. So it would be that Friday of the first week. Totally acknowledge that we haven't coordinated with all committee members on this yet. But that's the earliest.
And the reason I just wanted to make sure you
Sure.
knew, the first Thursday of the month, and really the first and third, but most of all, the first
Right,
is triple stacked for me.
absolutely.
By-
Your
by
first week and
coincidence,
third week.
Caltrain, BCDC, BTA board meetings all on the same day.
Yes,
So-
so for your calendar, we knew the first week and the third week are rough weeks of
On
a
the
month.
Thursday.
Yep.
Got it.
So that has been factored in.
All right.
I want to acknowledge
Yeah.
that Greer teaches during the day, and that's a really serious, important thing. My work typically has me out at night. So we may have calendars that are not super compatible, but I would love for Greer and I to put our heads together on what we could abide, rather than have a third party who doesn't necessarily know where our flex points are, come up with that decision.
Absolutely. I think we might have some opportunities if that fifth works. I know it's a Friday, but I do think possibly the 5th of May and the 9th of May will be 2 days that both of your schedules, can accommodate. And it avoids the first and third weeks as well for the chair's calendars. So I think we might have found them based on folks's personal commitments, which is great. But we will send those out to folks to check.
I would love for you not to call them personal commitments. That sounds like I have to look after my, I don't know, my cat. Like we work for a living.
Your mic.
My mic. Oh.
Yeah.
I would love for you not to call those personal commitments, just as a matter of, these are, many of us work for a living, and I don't want them characterized as like things where somehow, I don't know. We have professional commitments, I would call it that, or career commitments or what have you. You know what I mean?
Understood.
Yeah, and Greer, I'm worried about you taking time off work, off school, on the 5th and the 9th. So if you're fine with that, then I can leave it alone. But if you are smarting a little bit over that, then I'd love us to just see if there's anything that might be better. Appreciating that it's quite a chess game and it's been hard to get to this point. I'm trying to be deferential to your needs as a teacher, frankly.
I appreciate it. I've talked with staff.
Okay. I will say no more. Thank you.
All right. I think on that note, the meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.